We simply
Today
can't. It's beyond our capabilities. It's beyond our narrow human experience. Fiction, however, allows us to explore the world of the huge with more freedom. Star Wars has always had a good sense of scale. From the very first scene, we see the tiny Tantive 4 being chased by the underbelly of the gargantuan Imperial Star Destroyer. This scene establishes one fact, that the Empire is huge and intimidating, and their ships are huge and intimidating. The classic Imperial Star Destroyer is one of my favorite, if not my favorite ships out of all of Star Wars. I've always associated the Star Destroyer with scale as the wedge-shaped giant that can never be surpassed, until, of course, it was. Its iconic wedge-shaped design is surprisingly simple, and it feels believable, even though if you analyzed it as a serious space warfare vessel, it probably wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. Almost all of the spaceships in Star Wars are well designed. Their shape language is so perfect, their silhouettes so easy to recognize, and the sheer imagination and diversity of designs is, well, even though Star Wars may be the most overappreciated franchise in history, I still feel like these designs aren't talked about enough. My love of them is deepened further by this book, Star Wars, The Essential Guide to Vehicles and Vessels. This was one of my favorite childhood car ride reading books, and I remember it being kind of hard to find. I had initially flipped through the Droid version at a stand before, but couldn't buy it. So I searched for it at any bookstore we visited, until I eventually found it again at a half-price bookstore. This then led me to the ship version. What I like about this book is the ships are presented in a bare-bones, sketchy way, with accompanying orthographics which adds this touch of realism. They're presented as if they were at one point actually manufactured. All the illustrations are detailed and dynamic, but I think my favorite is, of course, this one. I love this tilted angle, like the Star Destroyer is careening away from a high-powered laser beam. You can feel its weight. When I look at this thing, all I want to do is zoom in on those tiny, tiny specks of light, which I can only assume are windows, and think to myself, I could spend weeks exploring this vessel. Unfortunately, we never really got to see the inner workings of it in detail in the original films. We saw the bridge at a few points and maybe a hangar bay, but surely there's more to it. There has to be hundreds of hallways and rooms to maintain and run this vessel. What on earth would those look like? I always romanticized it like a cruise ship. I wish I could spend a few weeks exploring every room, every turn, every part of its labyrinth. When I look at concept art for huge futuristic structures, sometimes I wonder what would happen if I did have the time. If I could live the lifetimes required to explore and know these vast complexes, how they were built, what details could be discovered, and the kinds of events that occurred in them. I dream about experiences I know I'll never have. The closest thing to taking a more detailed peek inside a Star Destroyer in the original series would be the scenes in the Death Star in A New Hope. The superweapon, or superweapons, that take the cake for the biggest original trilogy megastructures in Star Wars. Although the Death Star is many times bigger, I have a unique fascination with the scale of a Star Destroyer. For one thing, I could probably explore all the areas of a Star Destroyer within a reasonable amount of time, unlike the Death Star. Secondly, I always imagined there was a greater diversity of rooms and functional areas than the Death Star, because realistically, with its main function being a superweapon, I assume most of it would be filled with either empty space or machinery. Thirdly, I think to my child mind, I got a better understanding of its true scale by the opening comparison with the Tantive. Seeing that tiny ship, which is actually also pretty big, in comparison to the full hulking mass of a Star Destroyer, was just so impactful. This is one of the reasons those sides we can't blame Disney entirely for being criticism of the Return of the Jedi is that a second Death Star is just a lazy repeat of the first Death Star, for lack of a more imaginative concept. However, this kind of makes sense. If you have the plans all set up for a super powerful technology that was only foiled because of an easily fixable flaw, why wouldn't you just try it again? The original trilogy always had a good, believable sense of scale about their technology and their worlds. I don't even think the prequels strayed much from having believably huge structures. The only trilogy that breaks this is Disney's, which doesn't even respect the distance of planets. In The Last Jedi, they introduce what I believe is the biggest Star Destroyer in history, the Supremacy, which is just gargantuan, with a wingspan of 37 miles and a crew of 2 million. Apparently, the largest Star Destroyer in history is funded and built by the First Order, who I thought were supposed to be less powerful than the Empire. Maybe I could buy a Starkiller base, and maybe I could buy a Supremacy, but both? That's not happening. It becomes clear Disney just wanted the Empire 2 without thinking of the world building that would require. And then you have the Rise of Skywalker, which takes a classic Imperial Star Destroyer and makes 1,000 of them, with very little justification for how Palpatine even got them. What's even more lazy about it all is that they apparently just scaled up a regular Star Destroyer and put a cannon on it. Let me say that again. They didn't make it longer. They didn't redesign 1,668 days. That is 10 years of walking. If you were to walk around the equator of the sun without stopping, it would take you 36,497 days. Almost exactly 100 years. It would take a significantly above average lifetime. With technology, however, the time is significantly shortened. A car going 80 miles per hour can travel around the Earth in 13 days, Jupiter 142 days, and the Sun
bye. I hope you have a great day.
in
This is only 6
years.
minute video,
The International Space Station orbits the Earth in about 93 minutes.